I have spent 30 years drawing up papers for men who never read them past the signature line. So, when the Duke of Marrowfield read every word of a discarded proposal twice, then asked me who had written it, I knew something in that cold house had finally cracked open. It began on a wet Tuesday at the Lambrook Charitable Board, where I served as the Duke's solicitor, and that morning as his unwilling escort. He had no patience for charity boards. He attended only because his late father's name was carved above the door, and a Marrowfield could not be seen to neglect a Marrowfield legacy, however little he cared for it. The board met in a long, draughty room above a coffeehouse on Lambrook Street, with a fire that smoked more than it warmed, and a table scarred by 40 years of ledgers slammed down upon it. The Duke sat at the head of it, not because anyone had asked him to, but because no one had dared seat him anywhere else. He answered nothing put to him directly. He watched the room the way he watched everything, as a man checking a column of figures for the error he is certain is there. The board was finishing other business when a stack of papers landed on the table with a slap. "And this," said Mr. Cole, the chairman, with the particular relish of a small man enjoying a small cruelty, "this is the proposal from J. Bray. An orphan home, 40 children, a schoolroom, a infirmary, a trade for every child by 14. He turned the title page so the room could see it, costed to the shilling. Quite thorough. Laughter, soft and ugly, moved around the table. "And do you know who J. Bray is?" Cole went on. "Our under-clerk, Miss Linnet Bray. A workhouse girl herself, gentlemen. Raised on parish bread, and now she fancies she'll teach this board how to run one." More laughter. Someone said, not quietly enough, that perhaps Miss Bray ought to confine herself to copying letters and leave planning to those who understood money. I watched the Duke. He had not laughed. He had gone very still, the way a man goes still when something has struck a nerve he didn't know was exposed. "Where is she now?" he asked. Cole blinked, surprised to be addressed. "Dismissed for the afternoon, Your Grace. Overstepped, you understand. We can't have clerks submitting." "The proposal," the Duke said. "I'll take it." He did not explain himself. He never did. He folded the papers, 40 pages by my later count, into his coat, and we left before the meeting properly closed. Cole still mid-sentence behind us. In the carriage, the Duke read. He did not speak the entire journey, and I had long since learned not to fill his silences with my own voice. Twice he turned back several pages, as though checking that what he'd read the first time had truly been there. Once, at a page near the middle, the one headed, "On the Keeping of Dignity," he stopped altogether, and did not turn it for the better part of a mile. I had served him 11 years, and never seen him read anything twice, except a contract he suspected of fraud. He read this twice within the hour, and a third time that evening in his study, where he summoned me back at 9 o'clock with the pages spread across his desk like a man laying out evidence. "Wren," he said, "tell me what you see." I looked at the pages. Drawings of dormitories with proper ventilation, a kitchen garden laid out by season, a ledger of costs that ran to the farthing, a schedule of trades a child might learn by age and aptitude, even a page on what she called the keeping of dignity. Small things, a peg for each child's coat, a name on each bed, because she had grown up without either. "I see," I said carefully. "A plan better than anything this board has produced in 20 years. I see that too." He tapped the page on dignity. "I see something else. Wren, what do you know of St. Aldous' workhouse school in Bermondsey?" I knew very little. I said so. "I was sent there," he said, "for 2 years after my mother died and my father could not look at me. I was 7. He said it flatly, the way a man states a fact he has long since stopped feeling, except that his hand, resting on the page, had gone white at the knuckle. No peg for my coat, no name on my bed. I slept in a row of 40 boys and learned that the only safety was to want nothing, so nothing could be taken. I did not speak. In 11 years he had told me nothing of his childhood beyond the dates required for legal documents. "She has written," he said, "the institution I needed and did not have, and this board laughed her out of the room for it." He stood, and for the first time in my long service I saw the Duke of Marrowfield look like a man about to do something reckless. "Find out everything about Miss Linnet Bray," he said, quietly, "by tomorrow. What I found by morning was this: Linnet Bray, 26, raised from infancy at the Bermondsey workhouse. The same house, though years apart, as the Duke himself, a coincidence I confess unsettled me when I reported it. Apprenticed at 14 to a stationer, where she'd taught herself figures and fair copy. Hired by the Lambrook Board 4 years ago as an underclerk, at a wage that would not keep a cat. Unmarried, lodging in 2 rooms above a chandler's in Cheapside with. The landlady told my clerk, unprompted, not a penny to spare and never a complaint out of her. And the proposal, it transpired, was not new. She had submitted versions of it 3 times in 4 years, each time under initials, each time filed and forgotten. This was simply the first time anyone had bothered to ask who J. Bray was, and the only reason they'd asked was to have someone to laugh at. The Duke read my report standing at his window, and when he finished he said only, "Bring her here," not summoned, asked. "If she will not come, I will go to her." She came. I collected her myself from her lodgings on the Thursday, and I will say plainly that she did not behave as a woman summoned to a duke's house ought to behave. She was not nervous. She was guarded, the particular wariness of someone who has learned that being noticed is usually the prelude to being hurt. But when she stepped into the Marrowfield drawing room and saw her own pages spread across the table, something in her face changed. Not hope, something more careful than hope. Recognition, perhaps, that someone had actually read it. "Miss Bray," the Duke said. He did not sit, though he gestured that she should. She did not. "I read your proposal for the Lambrook Orphan Home 3 times. The board rejected it, Your Grace." Her voice was even. "Several times, in fact. I'm aware it isn't wanted." "I didn't ask whether it was wanted," I asked. He paused, and I watched him choose the next words with unusual care. "I asked whether it was right. It is. Every page of it. The dormitory ventilation, the trade schedule, the page on names and pegs and dignity. Miss Bray, where did the page on dignity come from?" For the first time she hesitated. "From having had none, Your Grace. I thought, if I ever had the building of such a place, no child in it would learn what I learned. That to be unnoticed was the safest thing to be." "I learned the same lesson," the Duke said. "At St. Aldis's in Bermondsey the year I was 7. I have rarely seen a silence do such work." Miss Bray looked at him, really looked, for the first time since entering the room, and something passed between them that I can only call recognition of a particular, private kind. 2 people who had each spent a childhood being told, in 100 small ways, that they did not matter, meeting now as adults and finding the old wound answered unexpectedly in the other. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "Forgive me. I would never have presumed nothing. You wrote a plan, Miss Bray, and a roomful of men who have never gone hungry laughed at it because the woman who wrote it had once been hungry herself. That is the only thing that needs forgiving in this room, and it is not yours to forgive. It is theirs." He moved to the table and laid his hand flat on the stack of pages. "I want to fund this, all of it. The building, the land, the staff, the endowment. Costed as you've costed it, to the farthing, because your figures are better than my man of businesses. But I will not do it quietly, as a duke writing a check to make an embarrassment disappear. I want it done properly, before the board, with your name on the deed. First." She stared at him. "First? It's your plan, Miss Bray. I am merely the man fortunate enough to be able to build it. What followed took 6 weeks to arrange, and I was glad of every one of them. For I confess I had not, until that spring, seen the Duke of Marrowfield take an interest in anything beyond the management of his estates. He took an interest now. He visited the Lambrook board not to sit silently through their business, but to reconvene them specifically, at his own request, in his own house, which no one on that board had ever entered, and which several of them, I noted with private satisfaction, found considerably more daunting than their usual meeting room. Miss Bray was asked to attend. I believe she expected to be thanked, briefly, from the doorway and sent home. Instead, the Duke had a chair set for her at the head of the table, his own chair, moved, and asked her, in front of Cole and the rest, to read her proposal aloud, page by page, in her own words. She did. I watched Cole's face as she explained, in the plain, unadorned voice of someone who has rehearsed an argument many times to an empty room, and never expected to be heard, exactly how the trade schedule would pay for itself within 9 years, exactly why the ventilation mattered, exactly what it had cost a child, once, to sleep in a row of 40 with no name on the bed. She did not look at the Duke while she spoke of that part. She did not need to. We all knew, by then, who else in that room had slept in such a row. When she finished, the Duke stood. "I am purchasing Aldermere House and its grounds, 3 miles from here, for the sum named on page 11, he said. "I am establishing an endowment in the amount Miss Bray has calculated, to be administered according to her plan, in full, without amendment by this board or any future one. And I am asking Miss Bray to oversee its founding, as its director, at a salary befitting the responsibility, which is considerably more than this board has ever paid her for considerably less. He picked up a pen. The founding deed requires 2 signatures, the architect's and the patron's. He turned the deed so it faced her. Miss Bray, will you sign first? I have drafted a great many deeds in 30 years and watched a great many hands sign them. Steady hands, trembling hands, hands that signed without reading a word. I had never watched a hand sign as Lynette Bray's did that afternoon, slowly, carefully, the way a person signs something they have wanted their whole life and have only just been told they're allowed to want. L. Bray, she wrote. Not the initial she had hidden behind for 4 years, but her name, full and plain, at the top of the page. The Duke signed beneath it. Aldermere House for Orphan Children opened the following spring, and I was present, as I had been present at nearly everything that followed. The long winter of planning, the dinners that began as business and ended, more and more often, in conversation that had nothing to do with ledgers at all. The day the Duke asked Miss Bray, with the same careful plainness he'd used to ask her to sign first, whether she might consider a second institution, alongside the first, one with both their names on it, for as long as they both should live. She said yes to that too, and signed that deed, I am glad to report, with rather less ceremony, and rather more laughter, in the Marrowfield drawing room, with no board present at all. I was there the day the first 40 children arrived at Aldermere, orphans and workhouse children, chosen first, the Duke insisted, from Bermondsey, from St. Aldous' itself. I watched the new Duchess of Marrowfield walk the length of the dormitory, and at every bed she stopped, and she wrote, in her own hand on a small painted peg above each one, a child's name. She had built, in the end, exactly what she'd promised, a place where no child would learn what she had learned. And beside her, watching her write each name with the quiet absorption of a man finally permitted to feel something he'd spent 30 years pretending he didn't need, stood the man who had once been 7 years old in a row of 40 unnamed beds, and who had read her plan, and recognized it, and signed his name beneath hers, gladly and last.